Hello, Harrisburg. I'm Lenwood Sloan, your host and time traveler, and I have the honor of being in the presence of the past with Mr. Wim Goodridge of Central Pennsylvania, headquartered in York, Pennsylvania. Good day, Mr. Goodridge.
Good day, Mr. Sloan. It's so wonderful to see you once again since I've been spirited back again.
Yes, sir. Your spirit is well kept in the homes across Pennsylvania, central Pennsylvania, and in the Harrisburg area because of the photographs of our elders and ancestors that hang on the walls that were taken in your photography studio.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Would you
wonderful.
talk about your work with daguerreotype photography and
Well, to be clear, it was my son Glenn Alvin, who was probably the third daguerreotypist, African American, the word you use today, black man, was probably the third in the world with any body of work. I just introduced him to that, and it seems that people just give me the credit for all of the beautiful daguerreotypes and ambrotypes that my sons, the Goodridge brothers, have presented.
now help us out for those of us who didn't do well in science or class. What is the difference between the daguerreotype and anthrotype?
Ambro,
Ambrotype.
the ambrotype. Well, the one difference is cost.
Yes.
Daguerreotypes was the first form of public photography, and ambrotypes came afterwards. So those that come afterwards are less expensive than those who were the original. In fact, your Smithsonian today just purchased about $1 million worth of African Americans or black during my time photographers, not pictures of black people, but the photographer, the person behind the camera. So that is quite a feat today.
Indeed, and you're wearing an example on your lapel, sir?
I am. This is a pen. It is a ambrotype, and I wear it everywhere I go. So it became one of the symbols when people see me.
Mr. Goodridge, we have been fascinating with your history in central Pennsylvania and your role. I'd like to ask you, since you're so prominent in our minds, why did you come back for such a time as this?
I came back because of working on the Underground Railroad, of working with trying to find freer spaces for our people, with working with those who were not as fortunate as I to then become a free individual. I wanted to see where we're at today. And the first thing I do when I'm spirited back is read your newspaper. And I must say, Mr. Sloan, I have been so disappointed in all the work that I did, and my friend Frederick, and my sister, Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, and Stephen Smith, and all of us that worked so hard, sir, to find a sense of freedom for Black people. When I read the papers today, I see a similar type of thing that is going on that was happening during my time. As you know, I was born enslaved.
Yes, sir, and I wanna catch up with you there, but you have a conspicuous piece of history where the Underground Railroad became the Overground
Absolutely.
Railroad, and would you share that with us?
Well, you know, every time I start talking about that, the people I am around get a little chuckle over that. As the station master on the Underground Railroad, just as you cross the Mason and Dixon line coming into York, I owned 13 rail cars. And one of my rail cars had a fake compartment that I could put a freedom seeker in during the day when I wanted to get them to Philadelphia. And we would cross this bridge called the Columbia-Wrightsville Bridge. And I like to tell the story that I would hook oxen to my rail cars because sometimes the engine was just too heavy for that rickety bridge. And I tell the story that for that short period while the oxen and horses are carrying my cargo across the Columbia-Wrightsville Bridge, when they got to the other side, just to the other side, it became the Underground Railroad once again. So I had two things going on at the same time. As a station master on the Underground Railroad and owning my own rail cars on the Overground Railroad. And no one ever caught me.
Now, sir, I met your dear friend in history, Mr. Henry Watson, and he would send people to you. You would move them to Mr. Stevens Smith, and they would move on to Philadelphia and William Stills. You had quite a communication system of communicating about how you were shipping your human cargo.
Yes, because we had to have an organization. We had to think beyond those commissioners who wanted to catch those people who were enslaved and bring them back across the Mason and Dixon line and put them back into servitude. So we would contact each other because we were all businessmen. And when you have an operation that is so critical to our cargo, which is humans, and I try to make sure people understand that we were not objects. We were human, simply looking for freer space.
One of the incredible people who you helped to freedom was O. Perry Anderson.
Osborne Perry Anderson. I get that often, Mr.
Will you
Sloan.
tell us about your relationship with John Brown and with Osborne Perry Anderson?
We had earlier on, those of you who know the story of John Brown, I will not rehash it. Early on, there was I like to call it a scheme that we put together that should something happen and people need to escape, they would come to certain areas. Osborne Perry Anderson, when John Brown was captured, escaped. And he came to York, Pennsylvania. And he actually stayed in my emporium at first on the second level. On the third level, I was renting space, Mr. Sloan, to a newspaper. And if I can recall, the newspaper was talking about the black man who escaped from Harper's Ferry. Little did they realize he was right underneath them.
Indeed, sir.
We had to be quite clever during those times. Eventually, I did bring him to my home at 123 East Philadelphia Street and put him on one of my rail cars, the one with the fake bottom. He made it on to Philadelphia and on to Canaan land, or Canada.
On to Canada, sir.
And the only way the people of the day actually knew the work that I was doing on the Underground Railroad was because of Osborne Perry Anderson. In his memoirs, he talked about the black man in York who owned the tallest building. And by the way, I did own the tallest building in York.
3 stories?
Sir, it was 4.5 to 5 stories tall.
Indeed.
He told everything in his memoirs about me being a barber. And do you know, Mr. Sloan, recently I was spirited back I told a group of men that I was a barber. And they just chuckled. They said, "Oh my, we are barbers also." And I said, "Well, during my time, that would have been one of the number one businesses for a freed black man." And they said, Mr. Goodridge, that is the number one business today.
For black men today.
And I
sir.
just couldn't believe all of that. And you know, my daughter, Mary, she owned what they consider today a salon. And they also said to me, they said, "Have you ever heard of, what is her name? Oh, she was one of the first. Everyone talks about her. Madam C.J.
Oh, Madam
Walker."
C.J. Walker. Yes.
And I had to give them a tidbit of news. My daughter, Madam Nicholas, predated Madam C.J. Walker. They get a chuckle, this chuckle about all the information that I can give them.
In fact, many of the abolitionists and conductors, William Stills of Philadelphia was a barber. Stephen Smith of Columbia was a barber. Henry Watson of Chambersburg.
Yes.
John Peck of Carlisle was a barber. And so
I like to call it the first fraternity.
The first
because many of us who worked on the Underground Railroad, who were abolitionists, were barbers.
Indeed, sir. Now, because of the many memoirs and newspapers, we know that you were a prominent figure in the celebrations during the passage of the 1870 15th Amendment. What was your thought, sir, as a Pennsylvanian and a man born into slavery?
Well, sir, when I think of the 15th Amendment, that did give us, black freedmen, the right to vote, I thought we have passed a new medium. We have went from earth to heaven. But now when I look at how those things are being brought forth once again, I question all the work we did. The mere fact that many of us didn't make it to that day. I happened to make it to that day when we got to talk about our own freedom by doing what every individual free person got to do, and that was vote.
Now, sir, our interest in a number of things, our interest in black photography, our interest in the Underground Railroad, our interest in black entrepreneurs have kept your memory and your spirit amongst us. What do you see, or who do you see doing the work that you have done in the past today? Who are the flag bearers? Who's carrying on?
Well, as I am spirited back, it seems, through every decade, it was people early on when I first got spirited back, it was people like your Martin Luther King. And then as I got spirited back a little bit later, it was your people like, Jesse Jackson and those individuals who was working during that period of time. And now I was spirited back the first time in a long time when there was a black president and they said his name was Barack Hussein. I listened to that name and I said, ooh, those names come from the motherland. That was a good feeling. And then then I was spirited back for, there was a gentleman just recently they had a president, I'm thinking of his name, Biden.
Biden, yes. Joseph Biden.
And he was trying to usher things along. I'm not sure where we are today, but I say, Mr. Sloan, if we don't begin to make ourselves visible once again, all the work that abolitionists and entrepreneurs like myself and yourself, all that work might be in vain. And I brought my Bible along with me so that I make sure that I am saying all the right things because it is essential now.
I have always seen you with the Bible, sir.
I-
Or a lamplight.
Or a lantern.
Or a lamp.
You know, when I'm spirited back, depending on what I was recently spirited back at your monument. And I was reading those names, and I got to a Sarah Humphrey Bessel. And I said, my God, my son Glenn Alvin took her cabinet card, the card that she passed out. And we know she was an abolitionist. But my son, I said, there is something that has been ringing in my ear because there was a person that I ran into and they told me about this 6 degrees of separation. And I said, oh my Lord, 6 degrees of separation.
So, Mr. Goodridge, the monument is called a gathering at the crossroads.
Oh.
It was because Frederick Douglass spoke to a gathering of some 1,000 people there. If you could speak to the people of Harrisburg on a corner, what message would you give them? What call to action?
You know, Frederick was a good friend of mine. In fact, my daughter hosted him on several occasions. I believe that in that area where your monument was the perfect place because of the 8th Ward. What I would say to people today to research what was going on in the 8th Ward. What were those blacks and immigrants doing that we are not doing today? Find that path, find that bridge to bridge their wisdom with the wisdom of the day. And what I find, Mr. Sloan, is that so many people do not remember. The only thing, Mr. Sloan, that is absolute is history. History absolutely happened. And when we do not remember our history, we tend to fail.
And sir, if you could take back to your time some piece of philosophy or information about our progress or demise, what would you tell the people of your time about the future?
I often go back and tell them about things, but how you put it, Mr. Sloan, I think that, there is a map of comparative states between slave and free enslaved states. It was in 1850. That map exists. And how this country was carved out. And the reason why I'm bringing this up because they're aware of this map. How this country is carved out is almost exactly the way it was carved out in 1850. And one of the young people brought to my attention that the only difference is the colors on how it was carved out. During our time, Florida, North Carolina, South Carolina were a pinkish color. And then they turned blue. And today they're red.
They're red. Yes, sir.
And Pennsylvania, where we are today, was a reddish color, the way it's carved out. And now we are blue. Some people said purple recently. But how it is carved out is the same. And I had a young man in his teens say, Mr. Goodridge, we have not changed that much. And I said, with the exception is if it changed back, you know how to change it back because we did it for you.
Mr. Goodridge, we are at Channel 20 on Chester Way, which is formerly called Walnut Street, and we're just across the street from the Federal Building.
Oh my.
Where Richard McAllister had his bounty office. Could you talk about that complexity of bounty and also what happened at the courthouse, which actually stood on the site where we are now?
You know, it gives me really no joy to talk about Richard McAllister, but being born on the plantation in Fort Hunter, graduating from Dickinson College, and I must say was one of the most notorious slave catchers. His job, or how he viewed his job, was to take as many people, both freedmen, and freedmen, back across the Mason and Dixon line and put them back in servitude. And every time I'm spirited back and I see that Federal Building that was, I guess, across from this area, it makes me wonder, was that by design? Because the jailhouse, where he snuck people in at night so he could run them through the system, was right across the street.
The jailhouse, sir, was on the footprint of what the building that Channel 20 is in now.
Maybe that's the uncomfortable feeling I got when I first walked through the door. Because Mr. McAllister would run those people, and many of them were freedmen or freemen. But he didn't matter to him because his thought pattern is as many people as I can hear. I will become the most important person, and then perhaps the president will give me a cabinet job or a secretary job.
Now, he had the misfortune of arresting two men who were freed, and the waiters and the restaurateurs and the oyster salesmen in the area, which is now downtown Harrisburg, gathered in the street in front of this building, Channel 20 and the Federal Building, in what was then called a resistance, but is now called a riot, as they freed those men who were wrongfully arrested and scurried them in to the old Eighth Ward.
We have a lot that we could say about the Eighth Ward and about this capital city, Harrisburg, and how all of the antennas to the other cities become this melting area called, what is it, South Central Pennsylvania?
Yes, sir.
But McAllister is one that we need not ever forget.
And the tension of the events that McAllister stirred caused a resistance movement in Harrisburg at the time and forged the identity of what would become the color convention.
Maybe I'll take that back. Maybe it was a good thing that he did the things that he did, not for the individuals, but for the greater good of this region.
And I wanted to bring your attention to that story, sir, because it's very much like the stories that are appearing in our newspapers now about people who are wrongfully arrested
and detained.
And
And
depart.
Mr. Sloan, that really does remind me of my good friend Stephen Smith and his wife, Harriet. By them, even in our time, understood that there needed to be a legal fund. So my good friend Stephen and his wife started a legal fund so that those individuals who were freed and taken back and put in servitude could have legal representation. And that's something that I think needs to be explored today.
And sir, the blueprint of your Underground Railroad and legal funds is very much like the strategy that we are now using with our immigration crises. I thank you for reminding us that history provides us a blueprint of how to navigate ourselves through current events. Well, Mr. Goodridge, we've been talking about the statue in Harrisburg on the corner of 4th and Walnut Street, but your image is in York also. Would you tell us about the monument?
Yes, they decide, and I like to call them sister statues or brother statues. And I call it sister statues because of Frances Ellen Watkins Harper. Frances Harper lived with me for a short period of time. She came in to teach the colored children, and she stayed in my home. But the statue of the likeness of me is also like the statue in on the Capitol, which is the first tableau of African Americans on state capitol ground. Well, the likeness of me in York is the first African American statue in the whole county of York.
And I love the fact that you can sit on the bench beside you.
And sit beside my likeness. And something else that we are doing, similar to what you have done in the capital city, Philadelphia Street. A portion of Philadelphia Street will be renamed, or let me say this correctly, and a name added to it, William Goodridge Way. Now, how familiar does that sound?
As we have added Chester Way to Walnut Street.
You see how we are still connected and that we are still working as people who want to see change.
We were not satellites or outposts. We were connected, interconnected. Sir, I have to end on a happy note because Christmas is my favorite season. I know you had a great deal of input and impact on the way we celebrate Christmas.
Yes, I was in Philadelphia one time. I saw this pretty much German way of doing things with this Christmas tree. And I said, as an entrepreneur, I'm going to come bring one back to York. And I brought the tree back. My family and I decorated it. I put it in our parlor. And I have to say, I charged a small fee for people to come and look at it. But I was considered the first to bring a Christmas tree to Little York.
And now York's William Goodridge House has quite a tradition
We
of
do,
Christmas
we do.
trees.
And the celebration of my family and myself, we have the festival of trees. And throughout my home, which is now called a museum or education facility, during that time we have about 35 or 40 decorated trees that people in the community or organizations today will decorate. And for the whole month of December to January the 2nd or 3rd, you could come to my home. I still call it my home, and watch these Christmas trees. And I tell you, it is a joy when I'm spirited back to see the young people look at the trees and all. But remember, even during my time, they looked at my tree and all.
Sir, your trees lit up the smiles of children.
Yes.
Your impact on the quality of life, equity, justice, and freedom has lit up our pathway on the quest of freedom. And I thank you for being amongst us. One last word for Harrisburg that light our way as we go into these desperate times ahead. Some candle for us to carry.
Well, typically, like you said, I usually carry my lamp. I would hope that each of the individuals using it as a symbol would light up not just their brains, their way of thinking, so that this city will progress. Now, I don't get into future day politics, but I do believe that if you just turn a light on, you'll see the truth. You'll see what's real, and you will not be walking in darkness.
Mr. William Goodridge, abolitionist, entrepreneur, thought leader, and conductor on the quest for freedom, we thank you so much for being in our time, for our time. I'm Lenwood Sloan, your host and time traveler. I'd like to thank Channel 20, and I'll see you again in some century, future or past.